one of the companies that I invest quite a bit in, and that I really get interested in, is a company called Recursion Pharmaceutical. So they're in a very different space than we are. But it's their operating model that really kind of piqued my curiosity at first. So they're a pharma company, but they kind of built their entire operating model around data and AI from the get-go, right? Recently, they got an investment from NVIDIA to kind of scale up their operations. I think they got a $50 million investment in it from NVIDIA in the summer. And so, I'm one of those guys that reads the 10K from companies that I'm investing in. So I'm one of those weirdos. And there's a lot of things that I picked up out of that document that I really related with. And I thought that was a good parallel to draw between what they do and what we're doing essentially in the industry, and not only completion, but in oil and gas as a whole, and where we're really leaders, I think, in oil and gas. So essentially, like their operating model is like it's a loop, right? So it's like there's three elements of that loop. Like they move from atoms to bits. So what they do is I'm not a pharma guy, right? So they do they create those molecules in lab, and they study some of the viruses and microbes and whatnot, and then they digitize all of the DNA from all those living organisms, which gives them a platform to then analyze them, synthesize them, and do all sorts of analytics and research on that using the power of GPUs, computers, and all the new technology, especially with the whole changes we see in artificial intelligence from neural networks and all those things that are really taking off to the next level right now. And then based on those findings, they move from the bits back to the atoms, because they produce drugs that can address some of those diseases and sickness. And so I thought it was a very interesting one because, a lot of that loop is not new in the sense that, since the early 2000s, look at how companies like Google with their advertisement business have built their business, right? Everything is digitized, right? It's you see people click more on this, or they spend more of their session time looking at this particular thing. And so they move that into their data center, they study it, and then they figure out, okay, we should move this ad up, this ad down, all this, right? And that was kind of how, they operated and got really, really good at it. The big advantage of a model like the advertisement business is everything is on the digital world. So you stay in the realms of bits, so you can go really, really fast. What was interesting for me about Recursion and that has a parallel with what we're doing at Colbor is you have to deal with atoms, right? That's in the physical world. Kinetically, you have to change the physical world in order to have an impact and have a positive economic outcome, which makes things much more challenging in reality. And that's why 20 years later, after Google AdSense and all that, it's kind of took off. We're still working through the same patterns that they've established as the good pattern to follow. But we're still kind of addressing some of the challenges that comes with the fact that we're working in the atoms world. And so a good example of that is Google Maps actually is a good example of that. And so the first element of the loop is you move from atoms to bits. And that would be, Google, they have those cars out there with the big camera on top that everybody's probably seen at least once. And they drive through every street of every town of, every country, essentially. And then they just upload that to their data centers. And then you get into the second piece of the loop where you basically you take those physical maps and you turn them into digital maps in the data center. But then it only becomes useful when you have a way to put that back in the hands of the worlds of atoms. And that's the third piece of the loop that closes the loop from bits to atom. And in the case of Google Maps, it's actually their app, right? So then you can you can sit in your car, connect your car to CarPlay, your phone to CarPlay, say, I want to go to Disney World, and it's going to, in an instant, give you the shortest path, the most efficient path to get to Disney World, right? And that's like really good example of like that whole bit, that whole story. So at Colbor, we've been really focused on the first piece of the loop, right? Because like our whole business is built around how do we create a proper digital map of the completions operation, with all the challenges that we have to face in how a pad is coming together, and how we have to, have the data from the wellhead, and how we have to synchronize all the data from different data sources. Like all that challenge is actually all about creating that digital map. And so what I talked about with our team is kind of like, the next phase and the next step that we have to get more into now that we have kind of like really well established that digital map is getting into the rest of the loop, right? So one of the things, for example, that we're doing a lot with our customers is we're moving that data into their data warehouses and data lakes, because sometimes they have their own analytics team, they have their own completions engineering teams, their own reservoir engineering teams. And so how do we make sure that we move that digital map inside the organization so that it's in a place where it can be leveraged by those teams, right? And then the next step after that is like, how do we give also our customers the ability to move that back, right? Because it's one thing to have the digital map and get your learnings and figure out what you want to do now that you have a better understanding, either through machines and now analyzing your data or humans. But then it's another thing to find your way to move those learning back into reality so that you kind of compound that improvement over time constantly. And so that's kind of like more of the futuristic stuff that we're looking to with our product team right now, is like those elements of smartPAD that we want to have that now brings those learnings back into the field, back into operations, so that it can be put back from the bits to the atoms, essentially. So that's kind of the story, and then the parallel with that company that I thought was interesting. Another aspect that I talked about with the team was our value proposition. Obviously we work with a lot of scientists, engineers, and when you talk to our engineers, a lot of times like their main focus when they think about our value, the first thing they think about is operational value, right? And so it's things like, there was trapped pressure on the wellhead. We caught it because we have our sensors there. And so we prevented downtime. So that's great. So that prevent downtime, it means that, the operator has to pay less for services being on site. So we have a positive economic outcome and all that good stuff. But in my mind, like our value is much, much, much bigger at the asset and especially at the enterprise value. And something that I wanted to make sure that I talked about, and the example that I gave is actually, we're talking through enterprise value, was the tale of two companies that are in the same industry, but that have two completely different operating model. And the example that I gave was Ford and Tesla. At the surface, they build cars and they sell them, right? At the surface, they're both car companies. And Ford's revenue 2022 is 158 billion. Tesla is about 81 billion. So Tesla's revenue is about 50% less than Ford. Tesla's about 25% less employees than Ford. Their EBITDA margin is actually 62% higher than Ford. But more importantly, their market cap on the stock market is about 1,600% more than Ford. And so, what does that mean, right? And I think that it's important to recognize that in today's environment, the value multiple given to organizations that have a digital underpinning is absolutely massive. And that's what we are doing with our customer. We are creating ways for them to be an organization that have this digital underpinning. And that can change their business in ways that we cannot even imagine, right? The ability for us to deliver that digital map for completions to the operators is massively valuable for them, because like we can't even imagine the type of things that it will allow them to do. All right, either on the reservoir side, when you look at their asset value, now that they can see from the surveys, geology, drilling, completions, and production, like all together, the amount of efficiency they can they will be able to get out of that, like we can only imagine. And I think this is, one of the things that is important to understand when we talk about our value proposition, is that we are a mean for them to have that digital underpinning right now in completions. And that's tremendously valuable on its own. Because like I mentioned, like those companies that can show that have this digital model, like have a massive value multiple on the market from investors. And so that was kind of the story also that I wanted to kind of paint the picture of the employees, that, it's not just about, yeah, we save that thing and this thing and that thing. And so we save X amount of minute, and so our value is Y, right? It's much, much more than that. And someone at the town hall actually asked a question that was really good. It was Cooper asked a question. He was like, you're saying that operational value is kind of less valuable than like the asset and enterprise value, but at the same time, you're saying it's important that we have ways to move from the bits to the atoms to the bits back to the atoms into operations. So how do you reconcile that? And that was a really good question, and I think the answer to that is like when you have a digital way to do that, and it can work sort of like a computer in a constant positive feedback loop, that's kind of like works like compound interest, right? Because if you improve efficiency on your well by 2% or 3 or 5% every month, or from well to well to well to well, you turn back 7 years from now, and your well and your asset value are like 300% more efficient than they were before. It's much more than just like picking on something that just happened now, right? And now you caught it, and by luck, because someone was looking at a screen, and or something like that, right? Like what you're talking about then is like you have a systematic way really to move that efficiency back into your operations, because it's moving through like a very deterministic way to look at your well and find improvement and move them back in the field. And so like right now, like a lot of the service companies out there that are trying to improve efficiency, it's pretty undeterministic. It's like either they have someone on site that looks at a screen and says, hey, like this happened, so we should do X, or so it's not really systematic. Once you have a way to systemize it, and then you can have this compound effect that just changes the game altogether. The raw data that we gather, APR, ASR, time blocks that we create, all of that, it's kind of like the first piece of the loop. Like that's part of creating the digital map. One thing that we're really focused on with our product team is making sure that, I have it on like the arrow really close to piece number 2. The step number 2 is like move it into like analyze and synthesize, is that you have to wait to deliver it, right? So for us, if our data just lands on our screen, that's not good enough, right? The data has to land into the customer's workflows, because that's where they can start leveraging it. And that's really where like I'm working on with our product team, like how do we get in those organizations, talk to the right people, find who is doing that work, so that we can make sure that we make that data available to them, because that's how we unlock really the value for our customers over the long term. And so I talk about like our APIs, streaming, our, we have a lot of integration with, well management system like WellView, Open Wells, and all of those. So that's another way that we get our data into our customers' workflow, because that's how they operate. They operate around those well management system. We're using Snowflake. We're using our own data warehouse. So a lot of other companies are starting to use data warehouses like Databricks and Snowflakes and all these guys. And so how do we connect those data warehouses in a way that they can start moving that into their own processes? And then talked about a bit about the future, right? It's like, because right now we're looking to, talking to the analytics piece, we have a partnership with Corva, for example. They're great at, the analytics side of things. We dabble in that. We do a little bit. I believe it's a bit crowded. in that space. There's a lot of players like, one things that we do for our customer, for example, like, is we've been building a lot of analytics with Spotfire, Power BI, and then we could just give them the template. They're used to working with those. And so we just provide them the means to connect to our databases and use the analytics tool that they're already using for all sorts of other purposes. So that's one way that we've been addressing that. We have our own little analytics tool inside the web application that does kind of the more obvious analytics, like pumping efficiencies and stuff like that. But that's not like somewhere like we're really, really like focused on, at least not now, because like, there's a lot of players. There's also a lot of other players from other industries that can even come into, the oil and gas and the completion space, because like a lot of things that they do actually is fairly similar from one industry to the other. When you talk about like analytics and visualizations, like there's only so much ways you can visualize data, right? So a lot of it has been done. And so that's kind of where I'm not as focused anyway, like in the short term on working on in that kind of number 2 space. But then like when I was talking more about the futures with our team, was that number 3 space where we talked about, we're currently working on a project with some customer and bringing their plant data, right? So your frac design, how do you make sure that it's followed in the field, right? So how do you also put your frac design inside smartPAD so that you can make sure that operation knows exactly at any given stage, any given time, that they have a way to refer back to this frac design that's really, really easy to see and really easy to do. And ultimately also it's kind of tied into the vision of like, once you want to have machines on site making decisions about the frac, having your frac design in a digital format obviously is a requirement, right? And it's something I call ghost frac that we've been imagining, or it's basically the idea is like, when you play Mario Kart and you do a lap and then like you see your last lap, it's kind of the ghost cart in front of you. So that's the idea around ghost frac, where it's like, how do I have a bit of the frac design and even like some intelligence that can come and guide the frac through a stage, so that it's fairly easy visually, even like for a human to guide it, and ultimately would be kind of the same pattern that we've had established for machines to be able to draw to control pressure and pumps and all that stuff. And so that's kind of like 2 projects that have been kind of more on the R&D side that now, we want to bring to market. And the idea was to make sure that people understood where that fits right inside the loop, the value loop of our customer. So that allows our guys in sales and account management and product to talk through these things really, really with purpose to our customers, and also ties our engineering team to understand like why they're working on what they're working, right? Because it's always important to them to understand kind of like, why am I doing this? So I think the last one that I talked about, I talked about ROI because it's something that it's kind of just a big, like a constant discussion inside the business around ROI. And so that was more of like the Alex point on ROI, because I was kind of frustrated with some of the discussion that we were having around ROI. It was like, well, we have to show ROI. So we have to show that we saved, 5 minutes of NPT here and this and that. And like on a pad to pad basis, constantly show ROI to the customer. And in the, I guess I wanted to kind of break that idea a little bit in terms of like, it's kind of a first order way to think about it, because, and I showed the Cummins engine at that the Ram trucks are using, right? It's like, if I deliver a Cummins engine to your house, like, do you have an ROI on it? Not necessarily. Like, you cannot do like really much of anything with like an engine, like a diesel engine. But when it's like put inside a truck and is the best diesel engine on the market, and all of a sudden now you bring a lot of value, right? So just remembering that the whole is much more valuable than the sum of the parts, and really kind of make sure that our employees, our sales, our product team understand how they're selling or they're advocating for a piece, part that's a very good, very necessary part of the whole that those oil companies are building, and that it has an ROI in itself when it plays its role within the system as a whole. And it's not just about the ROI of like our little part in this whole orchestra.